Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know that I'm deeply believe in everyone's right to access medical aid in dying. I've devoted a lot of time to talking about it because for many people, medical aid in dying offers dignity, agency, and a measure of peace at the end of life. But there's something that we don't talk about enough. Not everyone who wants medical aid in dying can access it. And I'm not talking about location. Yes, today there are 11 states and the District of Columbia that allow medical aid in dying, with New York set to become the 13th jurisdiction in January. Even in these 12 jurisdictions where MAiD is legal, the current laws were written with a narrow view of illness. And for people with diseases like dementia, ALS, or other progressive neurological diseases, where you may lose decision-making ability or physical control before you're ready to die, these laws can become barriers, not protections. That's what we're going to talk about today, the legal gaps that make it impossible for some people, even those with full mental capacity, to access the peaceful end of life they want. Joining me is Marica Hofer, president of A Better Exit. She's here to share her personal story and to help us understand what's broken, what needs to change, and how we can advocate for a better, more compassionate system. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Marica, thank you for being here today and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, to start off, can you share a bit about your personal journey? What brought you to this work
Yes,
and to becoming the president of A Better Exit?
I never expected to become an advocate. But my husband of 52 years developed early dementia. And he was a guy who was used to being in control of his life. He had always said that if he developed dementia as his mom had, he would not allow the disease to run its course. So this was long before he had any symptoms. His decline was very slow over a period of many years, but finally it got to the point where, although we didn't have a definitive diagnosis, we were pretty sure that what he had was the beginning of Lewy body dementia. And if anything is worse than Alzheimer's, that might be the one. Um, and so we started to talk about what we would do. We were living in the Bay Area at the time. We had one daughter in LA, one daughter in Portland, and we started having family meetings every couple of weeks on Zoom. This was during COVID. We called them unhappy hours. Everybody would have their glass of wine and we would talk about, okay, what are we going to do about this decision for dad? So we started researching and looking at what the options were. And as you said, the End of Life Option Act in California would not have helped him, because anybody with a dementia, by the time they reach the 6-month point, because the law requires that you not only have a terminal diagnosis, but a prognosis of less than 6 months to live. So a person with dementia, by the time they're anywhere close to that 6-month mark, has lost the capacity to make the decision, to express the decision, to be clear that that's what they want to do. So we decided to go to Switzerland. Switzerland is the only country that will provide an assisted death for a non-citizen. There are many countries that have assisted death. And interestingly, we in the US are in the minority. Most of the countries that have assisted death have far more progressive laws than we do. But we are, unfortunately, among the countries that have this very rigid requirement. One of the interesting things about it is that a lot of people from the US go to Switzerland, but they don't know each other. There's no way to really know and talk to people. But quite by accident, I was able to talk to somebody through a cousin who said, I have a friend who had a friend who went to Switzerland with both of his parents. Would you like to talk to him? I said, I would love to talk to him. This was the summer before we went. We already had a date of October 1st. And I talked to this guy who had gone with his dad and stepmother. One had cancer and the other had Alzheimer's, and they decided to die together in Switzerland. And he said that he and his brother, who accompanied them, had a wonderful experience. He used that word, and I remembered it because it was kind of startling to hear him describe it as a wonderful experience. I now understand why he used that word, because my husband's death in Switzerland was painless, peaceful, quick. He was surrounded by his loved ones. He was in control of it. And so few people dying really have that. When you think of people dying from so many diseases, by the time they get to that point, they're so debilitated that they don't have the opportunity to really talk to their families and their loved ones. So when I came back from Switzerland, I started to think about how really crazy it seemed to me that somebody on the west coast of the US should have to fly across a continent and an ocean to obtain something which I thought really should be our legal right. And that led me to find a few other like-minded people and to start an advocacy organization, which became A Better Exit.
Now, for those who are not familiar, what is a better exit? Like, what kinds of work are you doing, and what are you trying to change in end of life care?
We are focused on trying to expand access to the end of life law in California. California is a state that has been progressive in terms of legislation in a lot of areas. And part of our thinking is that if we can get something, if we can get a change in the law in California, there's likely to be a domino effect. States watch what other states are doing. And in fact, after Oregon dropped its residency requirement for people to be able to access its law, Vermont dropped its residency requirement, and other states are talking about it. So, what we would like to do is have either rewrite the law or leave the law in place for those who qualify it for it already. And the majority of people that use the law are cancer patients for obvious reasons, because it's pretty easy to figure out what their prognosis is. We would like people with the dementias and with progressive neurological conditions to be able to access the law. We would also really like to see the option of an IV infusion. Everywhere in the United States, the person ending their life legally with under the law in the jurisdictions where we have the law has to ingest a pretty terrible tasting concoction. Patients complain about it. It's very caustic. It can burn the esophagus on the way down. And it's really sad that the last thing somebody ingests is something that tastes terrible. Um, when they've tried to figure out ways to ameliorate that by giving people a chaser of something sweet or some sherbet or something, but apparently it's not very successful. This is because the law is written with using the word ingest, that the person must in self-ingest, and that has been interpreted to mean the GI system. Now, any medical person will tell you that that's actually a pretty inefficient way to get a medication into your body. And for that reason, it can take many hours for the person to die. The person dying is out of it very quickly because there's a hefty dose of sedative. But you could have a family sitting at the bedside for a number of hours waiting for their loved one to die, and that can be quite stressful.
In Canada, I believe, don't they have the IV?
They not only have an IV, but they have the option of asking the doctor to do it. And what's interesting about that is virtually all the patients in Canada requests that. The way it worked in Switzerland with my husband is that a medical person put an IV line into his wrist. It was attached to a saline drip. And when he was ready, he turned a little dial that opened a valve to the lethal medication. But it's very interesting because many countries have euthanasia, which is a dirty word in the US, but with the person's permission, the doctor is administering the medication.
Yeah, we also call it here assisted suicide, which I hate that term because
Absolutely. And when I we never use the term suicide because it's so different than suicide. I'm a retired psychologist and I've dealt with people who are suicidal, who are usually very, very upset and impulsive. There's nothing impulsive about planning your own death this way. You have to be really organized and deliberate and conscious about it.
and people who want to die by suicide, they want to die. But people who are doing medical aid and dying, let's be very clear. They don't want to die. They are dying. And what they're doing is
Exactly.
it's shortening their death time.
They would prefer to live, but they've got a condition that is either ending their life or making their life so miserable that they really can't tolerate it. So yeah, it's a very, very big difference.
Let's talk about the current state of medical aid and dying laws. How do these laws fall short when it comes to people with neuromuscular conditions like ALS? Because you talked about dementia, where the person needs to be, cognitively completely
Right.
there, and so they're not. How about for people with ALS and conditions?
Exactly. It's a big problem for people with ALS, um, because their minds are intact, but they will lose the muscular dexterity to be able to hold a cup. Um, the Under the US law, you can either drink this concoction or it could be administered through a rectal tube. But even if they use that method, they have to have the strength to push a plunger, and it's a thick liquid. It's not such an easy thing to do. And a person with ALS very often will have lost the ability, and nobody can assist them. In fact, there was a court case in California uh, brought by a woman with ALS who actually qualified for the law, but she said she had young children. She didn't want to die yet. She was suing the state, saying that California's law was not consistent with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is supposed to require whatever assistance a disabled person needs, to do whatever they want to do. Um, all she wanted was somebody to be able to help her lift the cup to her mouth. And she lost that lawsuit because the judge said, well, this is California law, basically. But it's a big problem for people with ALS. It can be a problem for people with Parkinson's, with other conditions where um, the ability to push a plunger or lift a cup. And some people, by the way, can't drink, can't swallow anymore because of their cancers, So it's really a cumbersome system. And that's the other thing we would really love to see, which would be the ability to use an IV um, infusion. And I think the doctors, the MAiD providers, would be very happy because it's not an easy procedure for them always under the current system.
I was talking to someone from Kaiser yesterday. They gave me a call and said, "Well, what do you know about medical aid and dying? Do you sit with, being a end of life doula? Do you actually sit with the people? Do you mix the, what do you know about it?" And I'm like, "Well, I know quite a bit about it. I've experienced. I've helped. So I've been with people who have done medical aid and dying. So, um, but she was very honest with me about uh, this issue. And in California, I can't, as you've pointed out, I cannot assist. I can't help administer. Um, and it was a really interesting conversation. So you're right. Even people who are working in the medical field, they would really appreciate, you know,
They definitely would. A couple of years ago, a couple of us on my board attended a conference in Portland devoted to medical aid in dying, and one of the panels was specifically about difficult cases in terms of ingestion. And um, it's really frustrating. These physicians have to spend so much energy trying to tweak the cocktail to get the time from ingestion to death to be shorter. And they've gotten it down, but there are still outlier cases which can take a very long time. And that's tough on families.
so what role do documents like advanced directives or post, what do they play?
Well, many, many people have asked me, can't I sign a legal document saying that if I have dementia and I can't recognize my children, I don't want to be alive. Unfortunately, that carries no weight at all legally. So the only way it's going to change for people in the US is for us to change the laws.
Are there specific conversations that you recommend people start having early, either with doctors or their family members? Um, even if they're not diagnosed with dementia or
Mhm.
something with, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the whole issue of what people want at the end of their life is something that really I encourage people to talk to their families about, because when there's a crisis, that's about the worst time for anybody to make a decision for either the person who's sick, if they can communicate, or their family, because everybody's under stress. So it's really important to have those discussions. What's important to you? Um, I think an advance directive is useful. Again, it doesn't carry the kind of legal weight that, you can't specify, I want to be euthanized. You can't do that. But there's a lot you can say, and it's important to get people on the same page.
It was really interesting because when I did my advanced directive, of course, I went to Compassion and Choices, and they have the dementia. They have the dementia, which I absolutely love, by the way. I think it is the best dementia advanced directive out there from Compassion and Choices. But it goes through a list of things, like if I can't do this, then this is what I want. And it goes through all those dementia, the dementia things, and I'm filling out the forms, and I feel like, wow, yeah, if I ever got dementia, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that at this point. But that advanced directive, the dementia advanced directive doesn't say, hey, I would want, I want to take, at this point, when I get to a certain point, I want to do medical aid in dying, because it can't.
It can't.
But it gives
The,
you a very good rundown of what you're
Mhm.
going to go through. And it's kind of like an eye opener to do it.
And it will be an eye opener for families to see that. The only thing that is possible, and it's a gray area really, is you can say, if I get to that point, I want food and water withheld. Now, you can say that because we have a legal right to refuse treatment, and you can consider food and water a treatment. The problem with that is that depending on where the person is, we can assume that by the time the person gets to the specified point, first of all, they may not remember that they ever made this decision. They may beg for food and water. And there are many facilities that actually are required by law to offer food and water. So when it gets to that point, it's not a sure thing, frankly, that it will actually happen.
And quite honestly, you could have a family member who is like, okay, I don't care what's in this advanced directive. I want a feeding tube put in.
Hmm.
And then that's what would happen.
That's right. That's right. Well, it wouldn't happen if you have named a healthcare proxy that's very clear about what you want and what you don't want.
Yeah, sorry. That's what I meant. Your healthcare proxy. There are healthcare because I've seen it. I've seen families where
Mhm.
there's been a person doesn't want a certain doesn't want a feeding tube,
Uh-huh.
and the healthcare proxy's like, we're doing we're doing because it's a family member. It was a son, and this person said, I want my mom to have a feeding tube, and she was out of it.
I think that was the wrong healthcare proxy in that case,
Well, it's so
unfortunately.
important to have those conversations, have real, deep conversations about quality of life.
Exactly. Quality versus quantity.
Yes.
That's really what it's about.
Um, One of the things that I often hear, and I imagine that you do too, is that people feel forced to end their lives earlier than they want just to make sure that they don't lose that ability to act. And it's really unfortunate. Do you believe that there's a real risk of that growing?
Well, in order to have an assisted death, if you have dementia, you do have to do it early. That is what's unfortunate about it because the person has to be willing to leave some good time on the table, basically. I mean, I think that's what makes the decision really difficult. My husband, in the last month of his life, several times said, I don't want to die. Now, that had no bearing on his absolute determination to die in Switzerland. What he was saying was basically, there are still things about my life that I enjoy, and I'd like to do them longer. But he knew that if he waited too long, he would not be able to do it. Because even in Switzerland, you are required to have the mental capacity to make it clear that this is what you want, that's your own decision.
You talked briefly about what needed to change in the laws, but what would true accessibility to medical aid in dying look like for someone with dementia and ALS, regardless of the law? I know you want to make, let's say you could change the law any
Mhm.
way that you want to. What would that look like?
Well, it here's what it would look like. I think this is our thinking at this point. It would probably leave the current law in place, and it would have a carve out or a track two for people with dementia and progressive neurological conditions who cannot access the law because of the very arbitrary restrictions. We actually had a bill in California um, year before last that didn't get out of the starting gate. That was a bill that would have basically adopted the Canadian system. In Canada, the language of the laws doesn't talk about a diagnosis, doesn't talk about a number of months or anything of the sort. The law says that if a person is suffering from a grievous and irremediable condition that they find intolerable, they have the right to request medical aid in dying. Now, they may or may not get approved, but that's a very broad standard, and we would have loved to see it. Um, our thinking now is that that was too broad for the US. I mean, it was so I think we may have to do this incrementally, in small steps. We would love to see people with intractable pain. There are a lot of people that have multiple medical conditions. I'm thinking of a guy, lovely guy in San Francisco that did some advocacy work for us. He's HIV positive. He's had several surgeries. He has had various cancers. He's not dying, but he has a lot of problems. And that's a person, in my opinion, that deserves to use the law if he wants to. But that's going to be more difficult because I think one of the reasons we have these very arbitrary restrictions is that it made it easier for the doctors. If you think about a person with cancer, at that 6 month mark, they're actually already very close to dying. It was very easy for the doctors. They didn't have to go out on any limbs. So what we're asking them to do is something that's uncomfortable for many of them. They like the certainty.
Well, also, I think doctors don't like talking about death as it is. I mean, they're there to try to make people live as long as possible with whatever means, whatever measures. They're not taught about, they see a lot of death, yes, but they aren't taught how to talk about it and with family members and to really
Yeah.
to let go and say it's okay. They're not taught quality of life, and it's changing, and I'm glad it's changing, but we still
Yes.
have to push a lot. We still need to
But it
change a
is
lot.
very slow. Yeah, we consider medical aid in dying healthcare. It's very interesting. I was just reading something about Stephanie Green, the doctor in Canada, whose background was in obstetrics. And she said she sees it as, you know, two ends of a person's life, very important processes coming in and going out. I mean, it's inevitable. I think that, I mean, one of the things that's puzzling to me is how many people really um, are so averse to even thinking about their own death, sort of as though if I don't think about it, it won't happen to me. Maybe it'll happen to the next guy, but it'll, it'll bypass me. Well, it doesn't work that way. We're all on the moving escalator.
Now, are there any recent legislative efforts or programs or advocacy wins that give you just a sense of hope right now?
To be honest, not yet. The state senator in California that authored our bill the year before last is the author of a bill that's going through the legislature now, and we're pretty clear that it will pass. Uh, it's very narrow. What it will do is remove the sunset clause. When California's law was passed in 2015, uh, a sunset clause was attached to it. It's the only state where that's happened, that which is really interesting. And what it meant is by that sunset date, if the law wasn't made permanent, if the sunset wasn't removed, the law would disappear, would not be there at all. In 2022, the legislature passed SB 380, which shortened the waiting time in California between oral requests from 14 days to 48 hours, because there were people that were making the first request and dying before they, during the 14 days. At that time, they tried to get rid of the sunset and they weren't able to. Um, so this bill simply removes the sunset clause, and it passed the Senate. It's now on the way to passing the Assembly. We're pretty sure that it will. After that happens, we are hoping that the same senator will work with us on some legislation to expand access. And I think she would really like to do it. Her background is she is an estate attorney. And so she's had a lot of conversations with clients about what they want at the end of life. So she's really dedicated to this issue. But there's a lot of opposition. The California Medical Association is very wary about changes. Compassion and Choices is not in favor of expanding access to the law. And there are many medical groups and hospitals that are controlled by the Catholic Church, which is always opposed to end of life legislation. So, it's going to be a long and uphill battle, but we're stubborn and we're plugging away at it. We'll keep at it.
Now, for listeners who feel strongly about this issue, how can they help? How can they get involved?
They can join A Better Exit, and they don't need to be in California. Um, they can go to our website, abetterexit.org, and just sign on, and they will get updates and, newsletters and things from us that we will keep people posted about what's happening. We started out with just the list of our personal friends. I think we started with a mailing list of 43, and we have a mailing list now of about 1,000. That's not much given the population of California, but it's a lot more than 43.
Yeah. And still, it's 1,000 people who are getting your email, your newsletter, and who are learning. And
That's right. And many of them have, really wrenching stories about why this is so important to them, and the experiences they've had with family members who had dementia and just were miserable, and the families were miserable. They really want to see a change. And it's very interesting because um, we know that when this issue is discussed, when there are public forums about end of life issues, the bulk of the questions have to do with dementia. One of the things that's really important is educating the public about it. There was a very interesting study done recently where people in the states that had medical aid in dying were asked, does your state have medical aid in dying? They wanted to know, first of all, do people even know that it exists in their state? And the only one of the states that has medical aid in dying where more respondents knew than didn't, was the state of Oregon, probably because it was the first and it's the best known. People, the majority in California who were polled, did not know. So we know that many people don't even know there's a law, and even the ones that do haven't, in most cases, had any need to read the fine print, and they don't realize what the restrictions are. I mean, we've had people say to us, wait a minute, are you telling me that if I develop dementia, the law won't help me? And we're saying, that's exactly what we're telling you.
I agree. I mean, before I became an end of life doula, I didn't know that medical aid in dying was legal in California.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really interesting when my husband wanted to be very open about what we were doing. So we told all of our family, we have a large extended family, all of our friends, and several of my friends, and these are highly educated people, said to me, well, can't he go to Oregon? Because people tend to think that there's something different about Oregon. Of course, it's the same law, it's the same restrictions.
Now, if someone is listening today, what is the one first step you'd recommend if they want to explore medical aid in dying? What should they do?
Well, it depends where they live, number one. It also depends what their health situation is. Um, if they have a condition which would qualify them, absolutely they should be talking to their primary care physician to find out whether that doctor will support them and be a provider, because somebody has to write the prescription. It doesn't have to be that doctor, but you would want to know, will my doctor do it? I know Kaiser Permanente is very supportive of medical aid in dying. Um, so it's not a problem if you're a Kaiser patient. But there are many situations in which people have found that their doctors are not supportive of it. So they need to know about that. Um, you know, the as I said, we had a very, very good experience in Switzerland. Not everybody can afford it, and not everybody is physically strong enough to travel. Um, so that can be an issue. There are other options. Some people do VSED, voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. Um, we very briefly considered that and ruled it out. I used to make the joke that we liked food too much in my family.
Oren doesn't have to worry about that. All he has to do is put some chocolate in front of me and I'll eat it no matter what.
Yeah. So there is also Final Exit Network, which trains people to use inert gas, and some people are using that method. Um, but um, it would really be wonderful if we didn't have the restrictions in the law that we have.
Last question. How can a better exit help?
Well, we talk to a lot of people, that's for sure. I'm the person that monitors the emails that come into a better exit, and there often are requests. I would like to talk to somebody. Um, One email I'm thinking of recently was from a guy whose mom had early dementia. He was in New York. His mom lived in either Arizona or New Mexico, and so we arranged a FaceTime. And they found it very helpful. I mean, I think they are planning to go to Switzerland. A lot of times people don't really know what their options are. And I've ended up feeling a little bit like an underground railroad conductor because a lot of people have contacted me and because they know we went to Switzerland, would you talk to my friend? Would you talk to my relative who wants to know more about this? Um, so that's certainly a service we can do, just giving people information about what their options are.
And I appreciate that you refer the under, yeah, you feel that you're part of the Underground Railroad because I do talk to people about medical aid and dying also in states where it's not legal. They get, and they call me and they talk with me about it, and I give them as much information as I know.
Yes.
But it is even the advisement. I remember when I first took on a client who lived out of state, I remember talking to an attorney. Am I going to? And I remember I also called Final Exit Network and asked them about it too, because I was really nervous. What does this mean for
Yeah.
my practice? So it's
Yes.
very
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. Final Exit Network has been involved in some litigation, but they have survived it because they do not assist. They are giving education, and that's protected. And they are providing an important service because they are there to help the people that can't use the current law, either because they don't live in a state that has it or because they have a condition that doesn't qualify. So I have a lot of respect uh, for them. We didn't know about them at the time that we made our decision to go to Switzerland, so I don't know what my husband would have felt about it. He might have been nervous that he wouldn't do it correctly. I don't know, but it's certainly worth telling people about it, particularly if they're either reluctant to travel or can't for some reason.
I remember watching as part of my training as an end of life doula, we watched videos, and one of them was in a state that they didn't have medical aid in dying, how a person did use the gas, the inert gas,
Mm.
and we actually had to watch the person do it. I mean, it was a videotape, but
Ah, mhm.
Switzerland seems a lot nicer.
I think so. Yeah, I think so too. But that being said, there are people that are really very grateful that Fen is there for them. With Vermont and Oregon having removed their residency requirements, that's also an option for people who live in states that don't have the law. The difficult thing is that most people are advising that if somebody wants to come to Oregon or Vermont, they come and they stay because although they could theoretically take the medication back to their state, anybody helping them in any way, I mean, even handing them the glass or whatever, could be legally liable in a state that doesn't have the law.
And again, it is finances also financially. So some
Yeah,
people can't travel like that or stay,
right.
a few nights, and it or the medication itself is expensive,
It is expensive,
and that's
yes.
not covered by insurance. So
Yes,
it's unfortunate.
I know. Definitely. It is.
So Marcia, thank you so much for being on the show and for all of the work that you do. I know you mentioned before, but if you can mention again, if someone wants to learn more about a better exit network, or sorry, we'll redo that. Um, so, Marcia, thank you so much for being on the show today, and for all of the work you do. I know you mentioned it before, but if someone wants to learn more about a better exit or connect with you directly, where should they go?
They should go to our website, abetterexit.org. There's a lot of information on there. You'll see who we are, our board with little bios. You'll see stories. You'll see op-eds that some of us have had published. There's a lot of information there, and you can follow what we're doing by signing up for our email list, and we would love that.
Listeners, I hope this episode challenges the way you think about choice, control, and compassion at the end of life. Because the truth is, many people with progressive illnesses know what's coming. They try to prepare, they try to choose, and yet the system often tells them no. So, whether you're a caregiver, a clinician, or someone who simply believes in autonomy at the end of life, please don't wait to have these conversations. Learn what's possible in your state, advocate for what should be possible, and support the people doing the hard work to make that future more humane. Thank you again for joining us. If you've any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.